Here we have two male deer clashing antlers during the reproductive season to ensure that they have access to females and to reproduce. This is probably one of the most common sentences uttered during evolutionary biology classes when we talk about sexual selection. Basically, because here we have a very good example of a trait here, the antlers, being used in a sexual selection context. Uh, and it also gives us a good idea of the mechanism that it's being used to select the trait in itself. So here, the male-male competition is selecting a weapon. And it also when we dig a little deeper here, we can also see that there's a lot of diversity to this very charismatic trait. So here we have a sample of some types of antlers in their diverse types of shapes and forms for extant and extinct animals. But this also works when we look at outside of cervid. So here we have a panel with a lot of drawings of bugs, crabs, amphipods, and beetles and all types of different arthropods, in which we can see very different types of weapons as well, from claws, antlers, horns, mandibles, legs. The weapons have evolved several times across the tree of life. They have a high diversity of shapes and sizes, and they also have evolved in animals with very different evolutionary histories. So, how do they evolve? How do weapons evolve? Because if you can answer that question, we can also try to explain the evolutionary histories of various different types of animals. But we do have one problem to answer that question. Most of the sexually selected traits that we have are mainly being studied, are mainly being modeled using mate choice, such as the example of the peacock feathers here, which the male is showing off to the female. The problem here is that this selection is occurring via mate preference, in which one sex is trying to attract the attention, signal its quality, or any type of signaling content here to attract the attention and be selected by the opposite sex. But in a male male competition scenario, the same sex is fighting the other. So usually what we have is males fighting other males to gain the advantage and try to secure the resources. And yes, that can happen via signaling, in which we have a very recent publication that deals with that. But we are still lacking mathematical formulation to understand what's going on when individuals are only using their weapons to fight, to gain mechanical advantage over their rival. So together with my good friend Danilo Muniz, we are proposing here a game theory model of evolution of animal weapons in which the animals fight without signaling. So we can look at the effects of how gaining the mechanical advantage over the rival can have on the evolution of weapons. And the logic argument here that we have is that fights are needed to secure resources. And winning fights equals to more resources. So, if that's true, then the fitness of the individual will increase by winning fights. So, any trait that will help the individual winning these fights are thus probably selected. Then, if the weapons are the traits that we are looking at, the weapons here will get larger, will get bigger, will increase in size or whatever. To understand what's going on here, we use this logic step to make three questions. So during the fights, how does the physical contact will influence the weapon evolution? The second question was regarding the relationship between the traits that help winning fights and the selection, the fitness. How much the strength of this relationship between the weapons, the winning, and the fitness will influence the evolution of the trait. And the third one is that yes, the trait, the weapon will get larger, but how does the cost will influence its evolution in size in this case? So here we have the three questions that we asked, and our answer to these questions were first to model a fight without communication. The second was to model different correlations between fighting success and fitness and weapons. And the third one was to model different types of allocation trade offs and see how they're going to influence weapon development. So, this basic steps to our evolutionary game theory model was first to model individual. For evolutionary game theory model, we're actually modern proportion, not individuals, but I'm going to use individuals as a figure of speech here. So the first thing that we have is an individual that has an energy reserve bar here in yellow, in which he can spend either in body condition or in weapon size. So here's the allocation trade-off. So the individual can invest in one thing or the other. And given that this is just a proportion, we have the other individuals or the other proportions in the population. They have different energy reserves and can invest their energy reserves differently than one individual. And we also have an infinite population, and an infinite population. That's why we can get the proportions. Also, the body condition, it has a positive relationship with survival. So the more you invest in body condition, the more likely the individual will survive. And this is important because we also modeled different environmental harshness. So as the environmental gets harsher, it gets more difficult for the individual to survive. So we need to invest proportionally more in body condition in order to survive. And the main thing here is that individuals, they will be required to fight to secure resources and to reproduce. The only way to reproduce is to fight. And the individuals here, they can't communicate with one another. So the winning the fight will largely be represented by the differences and the weapon that they have. But how this decision is being made, how much the weapon will be related to finding success, was actually modeled here. We actually modeled that with a curve that we call beta, or the victory curve, in which the relative difference in weapon size between individuals, it actually has something to do with the probability of victory. And so we have stronger victory curves in which the relationship between victory and weapon difference is actually stronger, and softer, in which we can think of this as a stronger or softer selection on weapon size. We'll let this model run for 10,000 generations, and I'm going to show you the results of this 10,000 after this 10,000 generations, where the population has reached an equilibrium. The first thing that we need to understand here is how all these things are influencing how the individuals are investing in their weapons. So here on the y-axis, we actually have the relative investment, how much the individuals are investing in weapons relative to survival, to body condition. And on the x-axis, we have the total energy reserves. We can see here the relative investment in weapons is relatively stable across the energy reserves. The individuals do not differ much in how much they're investing in weapons. And as we expected, as the environment gets harsher, or as the color here gets redder, more intense, the relative investment in weapon size is actually going to decrease. But this graph, I'm going to put it to the side a little bit, because this is actually a very soft selection on weapon size, because here the victory curve actually had one of these softest values. And when we looked at the other extreme, when the association between victory and fitness was really high, we can see here that the relative investment in weapon size increased a lot regardless of the environmental harshness here. All the individuals are investing a lot more in their weapons when the weapon has a stronger association to fitness. But one of the things that also called attention in this graph, on the graph of intent selection, is actually that individuals that have the least amount of energy, they're actually making a relative higher investment in their weapons than the individuals that have most of the energy reserves. So this kind of contradicts what's some of the stuff that we see in the literature, when individuals with most of the energy reserves will invest more on weapons. So here we actually have individuals, regardless of the environmental harshness, most of them are investing a lot on their weapons. The second thing that we wanted to see is how it's kind of an allometry plot, where we plotted the weapon size here on the y-axis and the body condition on the x-axis, to see how these traits will correlate to one another, if individual is going to prefer one over the other. And of course, we also had a positive relationship between weapon size and body condition, so kind of have a positive allometry going on. But one of the interesting thing here is that, yes, as the environment gets harsher, the weapon size is getting smaller. But also, one interesting thing is that when the environments are getting less harsh, or the costs of producing the weapon are smaller, the weapons are getting larger. This actually also is an interesting point, that weapons can also exaggerate because they're decreasing the costs of decreasing the cost of bearing the weapons. And the relationship between body condition and weapon size changed a little bit when we're talking when the association between fighting success and fitness increased, but the relationship remained the same, with a positive relationship between individuals. And when the costs were lower, the weapons attained larger sizes. And the last thing here is that we have a plot between the weapon size and the survival probability of the individual. And one thing that struck us the most is that there was actually a positive correlation between survival and weapon size. that individuals here, the more they're investing, the larger the weapon sizes, the larger their probability of survival, regardless of the environmental harshness, and also regardless of the association between fighting success and fitness. So weapons actually they have a positive relationship between their size and survival. So, to answer the three questions that I posited in the beginning of the presentation, how physical contact influences weapon evolution, well, overall, the trait responsible for winning fights increases in size, but how much will depends on the fitness benefits and the cost. The second question, how much the strength of this relationship will influence the evolution of weapons? Well, a lot. As fighting becomes more important for fitness, the weapons become bigger, and the individuals are investing relatively more in their weapons regardless of the costs. So the strength of this association is actually very important to understand which traits are being selected during the fights. And how does the cost influence weapon size, weapon evolution? Quite a bit as well, because high costs they decrease the relative investment in weapons, but the lower costs also enabled larger weapons to be produced. So depending on the cost individual is paying to produce the weapon, to maintain or to bear the weapon, it can also have larger implications for the size it can attain and for its evolution. And last but not least, we have the last prediction of our model, which is that weapon investment did not influence survival. They were in fact positively correlated. And this comes as an interesting prediction because despite of our trade-off between weapon size and survival, we still got this positive correlation between survival and weapons. So what does this mean for weapon evolution? Is that for the first time we have mathematical formulation and clear predictions about how weapons are going to evolve if the individuals are using their weapons only to signal and only to fight via physical contact. So if we test the predictions, if we test the models about weapon evolution using these two types of formulations, we can thus understand we can try to understand what's going on during the evolution of these weapons and also try to understand better when the weapons are used for both signaling and fighting. So this is an exciting time to work with weapons because now we have a clear formulation that we can use to try to push our knowledge about weapon evolutions further. So thank you for paying attention to what I had to say. And if you want to, if you have any questions or anything of the sort, or just want to chat about weapons, please reach out to me. You can also you can use the Pathable chat here or here. I don't know where it is, but you can also send me an email and a DM on Twitter. I'm always happy to talk a little bit about science. So hit me up. Thanks.